grab your pre-workout and turn up that volume. It is time for a new episode of the Powerlifter's Den with your host, Cam Smith. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Powerlifter's Den. I'm your host, Cam Smith, and today I want to bring on JP Price. JP, why don't you introduce yourself?
What's up? My name's JP. I'm in Kansas City.
So, we were kind of chatting a little bit before this. I know you had a background in wrestling, so kind of wanted to start by talking about how wrestling impacted your life and kind of how it transitioned into training heavy.
Yeah, so wrestling was really important because as a, fat little kid, I was in sixth grade and they asked me to start wrestling. And so I did, but the team that I wrestled for, because it wasn't in middle school yet, it was like pre-middle school wrestling. Around here, you start middle school wrestling seventh and eighth grade. And so we had to wear these singlets and they were like this wide and like your titties stuck out the sides of them. And so when I was in sixth grade, that was like the worst shit ever for me. Like I was going to the pool with a shirt on.
Yeah.
And so I wrestled with a shirt on underneath my singlet. And it was like the worst time of my life. And I sucked at it. I wasn't very good. I wasn't mean, as a kid. I was a really nice, sweet kid. And so I started wrestling and I didn't love it and I didn't want to do it again. But then I was good at football and my dad was a big football player. And the football coach at my middle school was the eighth grade coach. And he required that if you were going to play on his team in eighth grade, you had to wrestle in seventh grade. And so we had 75 kids on the team.
Oh, my God.
And most of them sucked. They just did it because the coach made them.
Yeah.
And I actually got kind of good at it. And it corresponded with the time I started lifting weights. So as an 11-year-old going in to be 12 years old, there was a gym not far from my house. And my parents, they, in eighth grade, they took me to this gym and then I started walking there 5 days a week. And I got so much better and stronger that I turned into a good wrestler. And then I went from being shitty at it to like being the best in the city at it. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and then my freshman year, I ended up like qualifying for state. And then I got ranked in the top 6 in the country. And like Cain Velasquez was ranked 1 or 4 while I was ranked 6th. And so then I like went to Fargo and I did okay. I like was 1 match away from placing in both styles and, but never placed at Fargo the only time I went. And then, my highest finish in state was 3rd.
Yeah, so I kind of relate to that kind of story a lot too because I've been playing football. I played football since I was like 7 till last year, and I kind of joined wrestling to get better at football, and then from there I started lifting weights to get better at football, and so it kind of all spiraled into like now where I'm post college just lifting weights, and now I'm getting into gear and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool to see someone else have like a similar story to getting into the world of powerlifting.
Yeah, wrestling's super humbling, and it's my favorite sport. To coach. Probably it's the most intimate sport for sure. It's the most like miserable sport. I'd say like boxing and stuff is up there, but I mean like typical American sports, wrestling is like one of the toughest.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with that, with the intimate aspect of it too, and it kind of, at least for me, the coaching style for my coach is kind of like a very tough love, and I think that kind of translates very well into powerlifting and like strongman and different things like that, to where it's kind of like you need to not just do the work, you need to kind of work on the mental aspects as well as the training too.
Yeah, my kids wrestled for like 1 or 2 years, and they just were not into it. And they were younger than me when they tried it because I wanted to see what they thought. And they did not like how intimate it was. Like one of them, my younger son, he's fine with being not a very good player on his team. He's just really happy to be there.
Yeah.
And in wrestling, you can't do that. You'll just show up, get the shit beat out of you, and then you'll cry, and then you go home. And so you can't be a role player on a wrestling team. It's just not how it works.
Yeah. And
you get exposed.
You can keep going.
You just get exposed,
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think there's a big connection between wrestling and powerlifting too. Obviously, besides the singlets, that's kind of just something that kind of goes along with it. But just kind of like the team versus like individual role aspect. Like, yeah, you show up to a meet with your gym crew and stuff, but at the end of the day, you're the one on the platform or you're the one on the mat, and you have to kind of prove it to yourself. There's no one going to hold your hand through it like a football game would.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're by yourself, and every mistake is yours.
Yeah.
That's why you see so many passionate videos from the wrestling mat because people get upset, you know.
Yeah. So I guess kind of transitioning from like wrestling into powerlifting and stuff. When did you first step onto the platform?
So after high school, I played football and at a small college, and I had a good experience there. Like, I mean, my freshman year, I was benching 405, and when I was a freshman, I mean, I was the strongest kid on the team, and I don't think that they thought I was going to be shit, but they knew I was a good wrestler. And my high school team wasn't that good, so it was kind of hard to tell. And there was another guy on my team that was like equal strength to me, but when we played football, I was a better football player than he was. And he was a very good weight room guy. And he just ended up just staying in the weight room. And he ended up stopping playing football and he got into single ply drug tested powerlifting. And I think he squatted, like 804 single ply. And he ended up like trying to host a little meet at the school gym. And I competed in that, but like it wasn't real,
Yeah.
and it was just kind of a unsanctioned kind of thing, I think, to be honest with you. And I like wore a really loose bench shirt that like gave me 20 pounds.
Yep.
And then other than that, when I was young, I just always helped out at powerlifting meets because I was always involved in sports and I was always a starter. So like I never really felt like I could disrespect my obligations and powerlift.
Yeah.
And so then once I got a little older and I was just lifting for fun after college, I got into CrossFit because I was like coaching wrestling and they like were into CrossFit because it was like good conditioning, right?
Yeah.
And I was terrible at it, but I was like the strongest CrossFitter in the world. And so then they're like, "You're terrible at this. You should do something else." And I tried to Olympic lift and I was bad at it. Wasn't flexible enough. I couldn't overhead squat. I was like up in this position and like it hurts to be there at all now, because I got a freaking banged up rotator cuff. But so I stopped doing CrossFit and I started doing Olympic lifting. And then a couple months later, I was like, fuck this, this sucks. And I met a guy that was getting his hair cut and he was a big, bench only guy. He was like getting a mohawk shaved into his head. And typical bench only guy, right?
Yep.
And
Jimmy.
so then I made friends with a guy in the area that was like kind of the strongest guy in the area. And I just worked and worked and worked with him until I got bigger than him. And then we had a crew and like we were all really hardcore into it. And then I had a big crew and then I started hosting meets and then we started buying equipment and then I dreamed of owning a gym and coaching and just kind of how we made it happen. But when I was met that guy at the barber, that was like November, December, and I did my first meet a month later.
Yeah.
And it was in the ADFPF, American Drug Free Powerlifting Federation, and it was my first meet, and I think I squatted 650 and benched like 405 or something like that, 402, and then I think I deadlifted like 585, and my first total was like 1636, which is my best subtotal.
Yeah. So your first total hasn't even, I haven't even beat your first total yet, but it's in the works for sure. But it's kind of funny that you were saying how you did CrossFit before, because my high school wrestling coach actually owned a CrossFit gym. So during the winter break, we'd go there and we'd do all those crazy ass workouts, and yeah, it would definitely beat the shit out of you. So
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot of good wrestling up there too, in your area especially. I don't know about Massachusetts as a state, but I know the states that border you kick ass.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of mostly like New York and like the upper states. Massachusetts is pretty good overall, but it's nothing like the Midwest, like Iowa and Ohio and
Yeah,
shit like that for sure.
yeah. Well, then there's Pennsylvania and Jersey.
Yeah, yeah. So, kind of more into you said the first meet was unsanctioned or whatever, and you kind of hopped into a shirt. During this time, was it still where it was mostly equipped lifting and there was like very little raw on the scene?
Yeah, so I wouldn't have even known at the time. Like I was there's no internet,
Yeah,
like 2002. And so we didn't know anything. We didn't have Instagram or Facebook even at the time. Facebook came along like 4 years later. And so once we got internet, once we got Facebook and once we kind of saw what was happening, I think like honestly, everybody seeing it is what killed, everybody being in gear,
yeah,
because there were so many more CrossFitters in the world that we saw so many more lifts without gear on that were like, wait a minute, why are we putting this shit on?
yeah,
And, for me personally, like, I just don't want to spend the amount of time it takes to get into gear. Like, I wrapped somebody this morning like 5 or 6 times and helped them get their suit on. Well, I never personally want to ever do that, I've tried before and it was okay, but it just there's so much to explore without it on that I just never like got tired enough that I needed to try it.
Yeah.
It wasn't popular enough in the area. We had a group of geared people for a while, but it was always like them in gear and me raw, you know.
Yeah, and I think kind of like the raw boom over the past 10 years, especially with the social media, had a huge impact on that. But I think kind of now like gear is kind of starting to get more the love it deserves again, and it's kind of becoming a more cohesive environment. Obviously, there's still like the raw versus equipped like debates and stuff, but I think it's starting to kind of get traction and being like on an equal playing field again.
I think it has to have more of a cohesive environment because historically, in even wrapped powerlifting, there's so many fractions and feds because nobody can get along with each other because it takes so many ex-cons and assholes and former whatevers that there's so many people that can't get along. Like for example, one of the most thriving um, geared federations of all time is the RPS. And even in the RPS, which was a major company at the time, Gene had a rule in the rule book that if you were convicted of abusing a dog, you couldn't compete in the RPS.
Yeah,
And I love that rule, but it's not a rule that would be in any major corporation rule book ever.
yeah, for sure.
And but it's in powerlifting, right? Because people can't get along in these sports because there's too many options, and having way less options is way healthier. And in the sport of powerlifting, I have pissed the most people off by far by being against many federations because I want to see very few of them so that we all compete against each other.
Yeah,
There's nothing worse than seeing a really amazing competition happen over here and the standards being held and world records being crushed. And then you see somebody show up over here and see a shitty not locked out deadlift or high squat or whatever, or that guy that just set the single ply squat all time world record at 308 or super heavyweight, but it was like 5 inches high.
yeah.
And I'm like, come on, guys. A single ply historically is A, walked out, and B, to depth, because that fraction of the sport never, really got soiled in the way that, some others did.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you on the idea of kind of there shouldn't be so many federations because at some point you just kind of see the bad sides of things with it. Like, for example, like I mean, you just see that people start a new federation just because someone disagreed with someone on a different federation board, or they just want to do it for the money and not to actually grow the sport and kind of equal the playing field.
Well, and like, for example, there's another gym here in the area that I used to work with a bit. And when I was working with the USPA, I couldn't work with any other federations. And then I left there, and now I'm doing WRPF, tested and untested, and USAPL, which is definitely gaining access to way more competitors to do that. And that I like the WRPF because I can have everything. And then the USAPL because, it's the biggest federation in the country. And so when I was with the USPA, felt like I couldn't really do that. And so I left, somebody stayed with the USPA, and then somebody else got their own idea to join this other federation from somebody else that wasn't happy,
Yeah,
didn't want to be in either, and they made their own. And he's like, well, I'm doing this because, I think it saves people money, and I think there should be, more of a newbie federation for people that don't have as much money and don't care so much about the competition. And I'm like, well, you can do that in the other feds, you just won't make any money. That's fine.
yeah.
But the worst thing I think, in my opinion, is to add another federation. And I'm still friends with that person, but that's just a disagreement we're already going to have because I only want there to be one federation because I don't want to show up to a meet and have somebody else that I should be competing with somewhere else.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and it's kind of it brings up the thing too. Like, say you hit like a certain lift or a certain total or a record or something, and they're like, "Oh, what federation do you do?" Then you mention this, and then there's a big debate and discussion about that when it shouldn't have to be a problem like that.
Yeah. And whatever video service you use, keep using it because I swear to God, I don't have a bicep vein, and it looks like I do. So we're gonna keep this lighting, and I'm gonna use this for every call from now on.
It sounds good.
I
Yeah.
want to
So
know. I want to know what I look like with my shirt off in this.
Yeah. So I know that you're a co-owner of a gym. Let's we'll talk a little bit about that too, kind of where that came from, what got you started with that. I looked a little bit into it about that on the episode with Dave Tate, so I kind of want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, so I own a gym as a co-owner with another guy named Ethan, who's a multi-time national champion in Olympic lifting. And Ethan and I, we were competing at the same time at a pretty high level. And I was trying to hire him as a coach, and we ended up like really getting along. And he's kind of the opposite of me for sure. He's a chemist, and I'm kind of front of house, and he's back of house. I make sure we make money in the door, and he makes sure we don't get arrested or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so Ethan is like an awesome match for me as a business owner. And if we didn't have him, I'd be out of business years ago. And so we wanted to create what we didn't have. And so a lot of gyms here in our town, there's three or four that say they support powerlifting and they have one combo rack, one set of kilos, one set of bars. Where I've got 8 combo racks, 3 monos, 70 plus bars, 10 or more of all the competition bars, 8 sets of kilos, turf indoors, turf outdoors, almost all the strongman implements. And then we have a ton of Olympic lifting space now. We built a 4 lane, 4 platforms in a row and 2 deep, so 8 platforms in one. And we've got somebody in the Olympics, and out of 300 members of our gym, I would say over 60 to 70% of them compete in some strength sport of some kind. So it's a pretty fun place. And even though never got to use it when I was like doing my best,
Yeah.
I can visualize that this is where I would have wanted to do that at.
Yeah. So what's the name of the gym and where you located?
Strong Barbell Club here in Kansas City. We're actually in Overland Park, Kansas, but essentially we're close to downtown Kansas City.
Yeah. And so with kind of being in a gym where it has the different types of, I guess, strength sports like Olympic lifting, powerlifting, strongman, etc.
Yeah.
Um, how's that balance and how's that kind of the camaraderie between the different, I guess, factions of strength sports?
I think it's kind of cool because they're kind of separated by square footage, and but everybody's pretty clued in, with what's happening, and they know if somebody's competing or if somebody's got something big going on, or if we're watching somebody lift, and even if you don't know, you're at least aware that it's happening.
Yeah.
And so people are throwing on their songs and they're doing their thing and they're getting spotters, and it's a really good environment for that. It's really competitive and fun. There's a fair amount of shit talk and I like all that. But however, we do also have like a really sweet environment here. I was talking to somebody about it earlier today, and they were we made pride shirts, and they were just saying, hey, I appreciate you being an ally.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, why the fuck wouldn't I?
Exactly.
And I'm like, I know I look like a Republican, but like at one of my kids' games the other day, this old lady was getting threatened to be thrown out, and I got thrown out, and I said, well, at least I look like somebody who's going to get thrown out of a game. And I told the umpy she go to therapy, and because he yelled at the old lady. And so anyway, this kind of space and powerlifting, people always, I think, kind of think that it's really true to like good old boy, white boy roots, and it's really not.
Yeah.
I've never in my life, through wrestling, football, baseball, any sport I've ever competed in or watched, any girls' sport, any youth sport, I've never seen so many different female coaches in a sport with men in it, and men getting coached by females and vice versa. And I've also never seen so many coaches of different races: white, black, Asian, gay people, trans people, people like the folks up in Portland and at Ironsides who are, incredibly inclusive. I mean, in powerlifting, I think I've found the sport in my experience of the most inclusivity that I've been a part of.
Yeah.
And so I think it's always something people think of before they're involved in it, that it maybe not be like that, but it wildly is, and so is our gym.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think definitely from the outside perspective, powerlifting can be intimidating stuff, but once you're kind of involved in the world with that, you can see just how welcome it is to anybody, any, like you said, any race, any gender. Like the women's community in powerlifting is honestly probably unmatched.
Oh yeah. One of the weirdest things that happened when we were kind of going through, and it still happens, with what Goob's doing on his page, And a lot of people are getting called out and whistle blown, and they should be, in a lot of ways. And then I had a client who's probably one of the nicest people I know, and that client, reached out to me and they said, um, I've never been uncomfortable in powerlifting, and there's been a lot of people around me in powerlifting because she started in a multiply gym, and she started around, honestly, a lot of people who needed second chances, felons, and people who kind of fell out of grace a long time ago, drug addicts, and people, that were alcoholics or still are or whatever. And she always saw powerlifting as a place for people that were misfits, and it's really kind of more mainstream now.
Yeah.
It's a little bit tough because, this also maybe should be a place for people that need second chances, but obviously we have to be careful about what kind of second chances we give to people in this community, and who, is allowed to be around. But she was really conflicted in what was going on because she was like, honestly, even if people have done bad things, when do they get their second chance, or do they,
Yeah.
and so it's tough, and it's tough to be in a position of power sometimes when that comes to play, because you encounter a lot of different, emotions and personalities and people in the sport. And that was kind of a tough time, because it's kind of hard to know, what the right thing is to do.
Yeah, and it's good that you bring that up too because I'll actually give him a shout out here. My friend Connor Boyle up in Concord, New Hampshire. He has a nonprofit called Iron Helix that takes in recovery and uses powerlifting to kind of give them that second chance, give them that purpose, and I think that's what makes powerlifting so great.
Yeah, it's tough because, that person that you're plugging there, he probably has some people in his crew that at some point would have not been welcome in my gym,
Yeah,
you know and but where do those people find a home? When do they become welcome? Do they need to be a part of a program like that? It's tough because, now are we going to get a lot of people without a pass not getting involved because they're a little bit worried about being exposed,
yeah.
and that's for them to figure out. I don't really give a shit, but but you wonder, are there more places for people like that where they can, find a home even after, things have maybe not been so good for them. Sorry about the lighting. I have my window open.
It's totally fine. Yeah, but no, I think that's what once again makes powerlifting so great is it's so welcoming, and I think more people need to kind of understand that. And there's so many backgrounds that it's important to kind of learn people's story and kind of give them that chance, but definitely don't let them go into the bad sides of things.
Yeah, and I think that powerlifting can still be a home for people that are misfits and needing second chances, but maybe they need to be a little bit more careful about, what positions they think they need to be in.
Exactly. Yeah,
You know,
I agree with that. So I guess we'll start diving into a little bit about your actual powerlifting career, kind of the big numbers you hit, kind of the journey, maybe some setbacks you had. So I know you were the first person to squat 1,000 and bench six in the meet. So we'll start off by kind of talking about what led to that, what kind of what not what led to that, but what was it like, kind of getting to that point.
yeah. So I always just kind of, followed whatever path was happening in training. I always took a pretty, smooth, like, periodization, you know, approach to things. Um, maybe sometimes if I was worn out, it looked a little bit more like conjugate, but it was never necessarily labeled that way.
Yeah.
I just, sometimes I went heavy, sometimes I didn't. And actually, when I went into conjugate to try to help my situations and my injuries, it actually kind of hurt me a little more because I was going a little bit too hard on those weeks and not maybe, taking it as easy as I could and still seeing results. However, I just kind of kept creeping up, and I was doing a meet semi locally because I didn't know if I was going to be able to do Reebok record breakers, which was out in California. And at that semi local meet, I ended up squatting and benching and deadlifting the all time world record. And then Ray Williams ended up beating it later that day.
Yep.
And honestly, I didn't know that I was going to have a chance to do that because it was my first meet in sleeves.
Yeah.
And then I tried it again a few weeks later, and then I missed my last deadlift and didn't get to take it back over. But earlier that year in wraps, I had squatted 1,003 and bench 611, and that was at the U.S. Open. And I got to go against Dan Bell, and he bombed out, and went against Zahir, and he bombed out, and ended up getting to steal the day from everybody that was favored to beat me,
Yeah.
and because I had a good plan. But I always kind of tried to just follow what was there. And when I had done 1,003, I'd say that was in May or April. The October prior, I had done 975. So I was very prepared to do 1,003.
Yeah.
And I had made a slow ascent over about a 3 year period, going from 755 to 800 to 881 to 925 to 937 to 975 to 1,003. And then when it was time to do 1,003, I was also trying to win a meet. So I didn't really have to care if it was 1,003 or not. I just needed to win.
Yeah.
That was the number to win. So I went nine. Dan Bell and I both checked in at 948, I think, or 953 for our opener. And then I said, lower mine 2.5 kilos so that the judges see me squat first because I squat deeper than Dan.
Yeah.
And he's stronger than me by a lot now. But at the time, I squatted deeper and I thought he was going to get murdered on judging.
Yeah.
And he did. He bombed. So my second attempt was 1,003. And the first time I went for it on my second attempt, it was kind of fast. And I took a step right before the rack command.
Oh.
And so I had to do it a second time because I wish I would have gone again. I think I could have done 1036 that day.
Yeah.
And then, so after that meet, I got out of wraps pretty much forever, except one more meet after that. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I was like, look, this raw record was 35 years old or so. And Josh Morris out of Kentucky beat it. And I think I can beat Josh. And so I went for it and I beat him. And then Ray beat me. So this record was like 40 years old. And then we beat it 4 times in 2016.
That's crazy.
And so then, I was like, look, this sleeve thing is going somewhere.
Yeah.
And, I was like, sleeves is definitely the future. And while I was on break from, usually after a meet, I would take like 3 months off and just do like, whatever felt good. And then I'd get into strongman and do some log pressing and I'd compete in strongman and have a good time. And then, maybe I'd get back around to powerlifting. While I was in strongman prep to try to earn a pro card, I ended up, fucking my back up just worse than it already was.
Yeah.
And having just really, really consistent pain in my SI area in my back. And I had hip surgery and I tried to come back after that. And then I realized my back was just getting worse and worse and my hip was never the problem.
Yeah.
So then I got into rehab with Stuart McGill in Canada and flew to see him and stayed at his house and really worked on that and learned a lot about back rehab. And then to the point where now I coach it some, and it really, is another feather in the cap. And then Andrew Locke also helped me out of Australia with my back. And I was just never able to rehab back to normal. I was never able to go for my strongman pro card because of how bad I was hurt. And a few years after my last meet in wraps in 2018, where I think I, only went like 4 for 9 because my back was just fucked.
Yeah.
And I took second, to Brandon Allen that year. And I think David Douglas took third, who's a great single ply lifter. And I was just done at that point. I was 396 pounds. And right now I'm like 340 and I feel better. And at one point I got all the way back down to 302 and I had lost like 900 or 98 pounds. And I tried to compete again and squat went okay. I got back up to like 705. I went from like not walking to like 705.
Yeah.
And then funny enough, I got all the way down to 302 and I benched 600 again. And I think that year in open, it was like for full meet lifters, it was the second best bench in the world. And I was like 37, I think at the time. I'm 40 now.
Yeah.
And then my deadlift was like 611. It was the same as my opener. And my second, I just ran out of gas at like 645 or whatever that number is. I think it's 645. And it was what I wanted to do. I really wanted a 2,000 pound total and still benching 600. I thought I had a shot at it.
Yeah.
But I ended up at like 1911 and it was fun and it was a good time. But I don't really need to do that ever again. I don't think. People always ask if I'm done competing, and I always say, well, I'm not going to say no, I'm not, but maybe,
Yeah, I mean, hey, there's some masters records that could be taken, right?
Yeah, I've had some issues that have been really chronic with my rotator cuff.
Yeah.
and it hasn't healed up. I've looked into it a bit, but not as seriously as I would have if I was like trying to compete.
Yeah.
And I thought about doing bench only at WRPF Nationals this year and trying to do 600 at 40 years old. Um, I hadn't benched in about a year. I hadn't taken any drugs in a year either. And I started back at 485 after a year off. And after about 2 months, I was at 540. And I was like, oh, for sure, get to 600 pretty easily.
Yeah.
And but then I started to get some pain in here, and it's really not feeling very good. When I get up here and back, it's pretty not good. So there's just no reason to push it. I've just been doing, push and pull bodybuilding days 2 to 4 times a week as my schedule permits, and just not really giving a fuck about it.
Yeah, so you mentioned that your 750 to 1,000 journey was over a couple years. Kind of want to learn maybe what were some of your the biggest takeaways or the biggest things that kind of help you progress at that level when you're already squatting numbers that people dream of squatting.
Well, I waited, so I stopped gaining weight on my squat when I was at 308. When I first got it into it, I did like 3 meets in a row where I did 755.
Yeah,
And like that seemed to be kind of the end of my natural potential at 308. And then I gained a little weight and got to like 335. And I did 834 in reps when I wasn't on anything. And so I did a 2,000 pound total where I could have been tested. I did 834, 507, and I think 661. And that was how much better my squat was than deadlift early on.
yeah,
And then that matured to 1,003, 639, and like 765.
yeah. So, like you said, you obviously put on some weight to try to get to that higher level. Is there anything in your training that kind of helped you along with that too, besides just putting on the actual mass?
Honestly, this is going to sound bad, but for most people, they need to like eat their Wheaties and follow the plan. But I was pretty genetically gifted,
Yeah,
and I just kind of had to show up. I didn't really do any accessories hardly ever. And I mean, obviously, I did upper body accessories or I wouldn't look this way. But I kind of just showed up and did the bare minimum. And what kept me so strong is not getting hurt.
yeah. That's definitely the
And I got
biggest.
hurt.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest things in any strength sport is being able to the longevity of things and just staying healthy.
Well, so think of it this way. I had all this natural ability, and I was like, my body was meant to do this, and all I had to do was not get in the way. Um, and so by being lazy, I didn't get hurt. And then when I finally got hurt, then it was over.
Yeah. So I know you do a lot of coaching now. Kind of maybe we could talk a little about that. Maybe some of your training styles, kind of what most of your clients compete in, or what like what's your pillars.
I think people kind of always have like a presumption of like what kind of athletes somebody coaches. Um, yes, I do have athletes that look like me. Like some people, all their athletes look like them. And yes, I do have some of my athletes that are striving to be a certain way or whatever. However, I coach everybody. I coach girls, I coach guys, I coach old people, I coach young people. The longer I'm in the sport, the more I appreciate coaching around the fringes of it.
Yeah.
So for a long time, everybody's like really obsessed. I have some old friends of mine that they won't shut the fuck up about the world records they coach and how great their athletes are and whatever. And okay, good for you. It's just not. I've never needed that for my ego
Mm-hmm.
or to prove myself to feel good about me. I mean, it'd be nice, I guess, but I don't put a lot of energy there. I'm more, involved in working on, this community here and having this be a fun place to train.
Yeah.
And I would much rather work with high schoolers or old retired people than I would, a 25-year-old that wants to be the best in the world at powerlifting any day. I can't think of a more annoying person to work with.
Well, you're talking to
Uh,
one.
well, yeah, exactly. Like sometimes that's not a good fit.
Yeah,
And no, we could like have a really good talk, but maybe we wouldn't be a good coaching client.
for sure.
Where I do best with people who are like, more, you know, open to this all just being an experiment where we try things over and over and over.
Yeah,
And, I do a lot of standard periodization. I do a lot of, um, trying to keep people just like going slowly forward. You know, the way I look at powerlifting is the slower you get better, the longer you can stay happy,
Absolutely.
the less likely you are to get injured.
Totally
And
agree.
my number one goal as a coach and a gym owner is because a lot of people, it's really cool in modern society to like talk about like having autism, or you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
like making jokes about your negativities, right?
Yep.
For example, like, you know, how many cups you carry around with you, or like how many drinks are on your desk, or you know that you have a touch of autism, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's really become kind of cool to be on the fringes, or you know, like you have a lot more chances at a lot of schools coming out and being the homecoming king than you do being the captain of the football team and being the homecoming king. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And, you know, I don't care. However, we've got this really weird thing where it's cool to like talk about how much you hate your training,
Yeah.
or like how much you hate your gym, or how much you hate your sets that you're doing, or whatever. My thought is that this should be fun. And if I'm going to spend my time doing something, I'm not going to talk about how fucking miserable it is to eat what I'm eating, but I'm going to talk about the freedom you gain from being in control of your life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So instead of having these adversarial relationships where, you know, it's kind of like meeting, when you meet a power lifter, it's often like meeting an old married couple. I think that it's funny that they like act like they fucking don't like each other.
Yeah.
I don't think it's funny. I think it's more funny to be in the honeymoon stage,
Agreed. Yeah.
you know? And so if we can keep ourselves in the honeymoon stage of the sport for as long as fucking possible, that's my goal, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, everyone does powerlifting. It's a hobby, and there's very few people who do it as a full time job, like maybe three. And it's people need to realize that we're just here lifting weights with our friends, as one of my friends like to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many talks I've had with people with 1,500 followers that were like asking me about sponsors. And I'm like, go fuck yourself. You have a total misconception of what we're actually doing here.
Yeah.
I know there's lots of sponsored 16-year-old skateboarders out here, but that sport makes billions more money than ours does.
Yeah. And I think the kind of idea of everyone just I feel like there's a lot of people that literally do powerlifting just to be able to post their Instagram videos.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I mean, no, it's a joke, and I don't mean this to make fun of anybody particular, but a lot of people get into powerlifting, and then you're like, oh yeah, she got a boyfriend, she's not around anymore. You know what I mean? There's like, now we're going to post about the trips we take and the adventures we're in. Powerlifting for a lot of people is a chapter,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with that. Powerlifting for a lot of men and women is a chapter,
For sure.
and it's a chapter you don't, you know, participate in forever necessarily. Now, you know, for me, it's more of a lifestyle, and it's more something that, you know, it's probably more prone to be a lifestyle for me because I was better at it. And you know, that's the case. You know, not a lot of people stick with hobbies they suck at forever.
Yeah.
Um, but they're also probably falling in love with the wrong things. You know, I think a lot of people learn who they really are, and then that gets them out of the sport.
Yeah, and I think that attributes to a lot of these flash in the pans you see where they'll come in, they'll hit these crazy totals. You're like, oh, this person could be a record breaker, and then you look on their page or anything like 2 years down the road, and they're just gone.
Yeah, you know, I mean, what would have happened to me if I didn't stay involved as a meet director or a gym, you know, owner?
Yeah,
You know, nobody would know who I was, you know, and they still have to be told because that shit was too long ago, you know.
yeah,
And I don't want to tell them. I don't have any fucking shit on my walls about that here, you know.
yeah. So when was the last time you competed?
2021,
Okay.
in November 2021, and you know, I like I said, I wanted to do bench only this year, but you know, not gonna work out.
Yeah. So now that I mean, like
I
you
thought
just
I would never do bench only, by the way. Like, I think bench only is totally for pussies, and I've all of a sudden become one. And so, like, somebody asked me one time to do a meet where it was only 600-pound benchers. You had to open over 600.
oh jeez.
And at the time, that was, I could do that. I could double 600. And I was like, all right, well, they were like, well, you got to fly to Chicago. And I was like, you mean I'm going to pay money to go bench press somewhere? Fuck no.
Yeah. I think I do kind of agree with that in some aspect of it. It's kind of like if you're going to compete in powerlifting, why not do all three? That's kind of the name of the game. You're there for a total. Like,
I mean, these days I'm kind of thinking about like, oh, I could wake up at 10 a.m. and show up at 11:30 and bench at 1 o'clock. Like, all right, I'm down. You know, wearing singlets for bench only is kind of weird though.
Yeah. So another thing I kind of wanted to talk about too is with just the you said you were like you still do meet director and you're still involved in the sport. Kind of maybe for some of the people that have their own gyms and kind of directing meets and stuff. Like, what are some advice that you'd have for someone like that?
Oh, for sure. Well, just have great people around you. Like it for people who are trying to grow this sport and want to grow this sport, they have to be inclusive and have to get people involved. Like if I didn't have people who would spot, load, and referee, then I'd just be completely fucked.
Yeah,
You know, if I didn't have somebody working the door, if I didn't have this stuff trimmed out and built up over the years and people involved, then I wouldn't be able to give this to anybody. You know, and we don't make shit on the meets or the gym. I only make money coaching,
yeah,
and all those other things we do just because we think we should. And we probably host 5 meets a year here in the gym, and then a couple more outside of it that I do for other gyms. But the biggest thing is just to try to keep learning. Ours always gets better, and it gets better and better and better. And the more you can like keep people around and build community, like I have this new thing where like even if I don't like somebody, I'm nice to them.
yeah,
And like I just don't have it in me at 40 years old. I got kids, man. Like, like if somebody wants to like talk shit on the internet on me, that's fine, but make sure you're saying something that's okay. It's not going to affect my children's life.
yeah,
And it's the reason people don't grow things or whatever is because they get too caught up and they don't listen and they don't follow and change and do those things that you need to do to keep people engaged. And I hope that we try to do that well. I hope we're not stuck in the past. I see a lot of other places when they start getting less popular and they start not being the place to compete at, it's because they're stuck in their ways. They're not doing what anybody wants anymore. They're not seeing the writing on the wall. You got to grow and change and evolve. I went from doing my first meet that I ever hosted was an SPF, obviously untested meet, where they started the meet and said, "Hey, does anybody in the crowd want to judge today?"
oh my god,
And that's literally how it was, dude. I'm not even kidding. There were 13 lifters, and I was so fucking embarrassed that I didn't want to ever have that happen in my gym again, even though I didn't own it. So that's how I got involved in being a meet director. Is I was so embarrassed by how somebody was running a meet that I was like, "Well, we're never going to do that again.
yeah.
There's got to be a better way."
Yeah, and I think part of powerlifting too, with being a student of the game, is more than just the actual training itself. It's going to meets, being a judge, being a spotter and loader, getting like being around the environment, definitely learning more things than just how to train.
That's the thing, dude. Is a lot of people as they get better, like I could name 50 top 100 lifters, and they'll never coach anybody. They'll never step foot, in a meet for any other reason than themselves. Um, but I think what's kept the longevity here is there's no job that's too little. I'd happily spot, load, as long as my body could do it, And I mean, now, people are different now. We got to give them money if they want to come help out.
Yeah,
We give them a free month if they want to spot and load. We give them lunch. We give them, a shirt. And it took a long time for people to convince me to do that. Because I do that happily and I happily understand and try to get along with the new guard, you know?
yeah,
And that's why I try not to like look like some stupid boomer. But the truth of the matter is, when I was growing up in the sport, I couldn't imagine being paid to help.
yeah,
Like people with no money are giving me money to help with something that I just didn't get it. And I still don't really understand it, but I happily participate in a way that, hopefully keeps people feeling appreciated and like there's a lot of value in it. But it's so important to keep powerlifting safe that I just couldn't imagine like taking money to try to, be a part of the positive side of the sport, until it got into like coaching and like doing it as my life's work.
yeah.
But like just sacrificing 7 hours on a Saturday, it just never seemed like a big deal to me.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that, but I think kind of to play devil's advocate here, I think with a lot of these local meets actually starting to be able to get more sponsors and stuff now, I think it's kind of important to be able to give back to more than just the lifters.
I agree that local meets can get sponsorships, but why the fuck should they have to?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why should we be taking money from other small companies that don't have any money just so that we can pay people that should be volunteering?
Okay. Yeah. I can see where you're coming from with that for sure.
And so, like, you're a multiply lifter. How many hours do you spend at the gym every week?
Well, so yeah, and I just started my first prep for multiply, so probably let's see, 12 hours a week.
Okay. So, to do one weekend a year, it shouldn't be too much to ask from somebody, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so, like, that's the problem I have. And I think people's time is worth money. And I think my time's worth money. And, I understand that, like, at some point at the meets, like, I'm getting paid and somebody else isn't. But, like, the amount of time and hours and sacrifice and the amount of people that can do my job is like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so when it comes to it, like, almost anybody can spot and load. They just have to put in a little time to be valued at it. And I do, like, I understand, like, people's time is worth money, but I also think that the sport is going like too far in one way of that,
Okay. Yeah.
where we maybe need to like bring it back in and just like be a little bit more like happy to be a part of the community.
Yeah. I agree. Definitely, a lot of people need to understand that it's give and take. Like you have to give back to the community because there's so many people helping you. There's probably been meets that you've been to where the spotters aren't getting anything. They're giving their time, so you should be able to give yours.
And here's another thing that play a little bit more devil's advocate on it. So everybody who joins my gym from out of town that's a power lifter that has any experience, I always say, hey, if you want to get involved, come to a meet and help, and you'll make friends. Honestly, like a lot of people make friends at powerlifting meets.
For sure.
And if we're only getting the same people over and over that we're paying to do it, then, we lose a little bit of that community aspect too. My very favorite meet that we host every year, again, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to pay for this, like by far. Same with referees. There's a lot of referees that won't accept payment, but I'm happy to pay them.
Yeah.
They put in time and they're the reason we can do this. And so are the spotters and loaders. And I would never ever say I wouldn't like give them what they're deserved. But I just think that like for the Special Olympics meet that we host, when I put out a thing that I need 10 spotters and loaders and I get them in 45 minutes, like I love that and I think it's beautiful, but I also wish we just felt about everybody that way, not just the Special Olympians.
Yeah. I
You know?
totally, yeah, and like you were saying, you make friends at powerlifting meets, and making a lifelong friend or a new, maybe meet someone from a new gym to travel to when you're traveling across the country or something like that is better than $100 any day.
Yeah, or to keep somebody safe.
Yeah, exactly.
And so don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with how it's going now, but I just worry about the future of it. Like I don't want to ever have to charge anybody $200 to do a meet. I used to charge $60.
Yeah.
And it was 60 for a long time. And then other people were doing 150 and I was like, well, I guess I got to do 100 now.
Yeah.
And now I think I usually charge somewhere between 100 and 125.
Mm-hmm.
But I also try to have one of the best products. I think other people charge that don't have shit.
Yeah.
You know?
That's very true. I have noticed that even from when I started a few years ago, the price of meats have gone up crazy.
Yeah, it really has. And I think that it's okay, but like the more shit we have to pay for, the more expensive this is going to get. And I think we're in a pretty happy place right now, but I wonder when that'll like kind of reach its next level of shakeup.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we can kind of wrap things up here. So I'll ask you my final question. If you could give a new powerlifter or someone going into their first meet a word of advice, what would that be?
Get involved, soak it up, do everything, ask a lot of questions, read the rule book. Um, fucking enjoy it. Like, don't have pressure. Like, care less about your numbers and more about your experience.
Yep.
And over time, the numbers will care about themselves. Like, that's fine. And you're the only one that cares what you do. And I mean, this is just any life advice for anybody, I guess. But you're the only one that gives a shit about you. Enjoy this, help others, try to make friends, get to know everybody in the room, be a light, just like I would say anywhere else, but especially in that atmosphere. And soak it all up because it's going to be fun. And, set yourself up for success, eliminate your stresses, and, remember you're here to have a good time.
Absolutely. Definitely here to have fun. People need to make sure that's their main priority. Well, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to come on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, man, absolutely. If you have a choice to use something for good or bad, why would you ever choose bad?
For sure.
So be smart about how you power lift. You're doing a smart thing getting into gear because you're going to be able to enjoy this for a long period of time because it's all new.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be able to enjoy sleeves. And then you can enjoy strongman training. And then you can enjoy this and this and this. And I think that's why gyms like this are such a beautiful place to be because for the educated, experienced lifter, there is so much opportunity out my door right now
Yep.
to keep yourself entertained for so long that this chapter for me is going to last a really, really long time. When for some people it's a short time. And that's always okay. But there's always another option.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you again.
Thanks, Cam. I appreciate it.